Now, joining us, also fresh off the campaign trail, Pete Buttigieg. He's appearing today in his personal capacity, so no disrespect that we aren't using your cabinet title, but you are here as Pete today.
Right.
Okay, so you've been on the trail. A week ago, we were doing the show. President Biden was still in the race. We now have a presumptive new nominee. But less than a week later, Bret Stephens is writing this in the New York Times saying, the one thing the Democratic Party is not supposed to be is anti-democratic, a party in which insiders select the nominee from the top down, not the bottom up, and which expects the rank and file to fall in line and clap enthusiastically. That's the playbook of ruling parties in autocratic states. You know the optics of this, that it was donors who pulled the plug on President Biden, and they're the ones calling the shots about how this proceeds.
Well, it's true that the Democratic Party is not famous for falling in line. That's part of why it's so remarkable that in a matter of days, Kamala Harris has consolidated our big tent party. And this is something that is coming from the ground up. You can feel it. I was in a field office in Michigan yesterday, close to our home, and saw an extraordinary energy. So many people from different corners of our party ready to support Kamala Harris, ready for her to defeat Donald Trump. And it's a level of energy that, frankly, I haven't seen on the campaign trail in a long time.
You actually have gotten more delegates, though, than she has. I mean, when you ran back in 2020, you accrued them. She didn't get any delegates. She dropped out of that race. Former staffer of hers says she worries about this coronation. She wrote about it in The Atlantic, saying she wasn't tested and tried. Are you worried about that? Because Bret Stephens also says this. He says she's unpopular. She's been a bad campaigner. She's been a bad manager. She's a blue state Dem who's got to win purple states. She's anchored to the president's record. He worries that, well, maybe Democrats should be more worried that there hasn't been a thorough vetting. So when she gets into this head-to-head with President Trump, there will be wishes that she had been vetted.
The idea that somebody hasn't been tested or vetted when they have been Vice President of the United States for nearly 4 years just doesn't make any sense. She is in obviously one of the most visible leadership roles in the country. And she's demonstrated both her effectiveness in that job and a vision for the country that Americans agree with. And that's a real reason I think she's going to win, is that most Americans already agree with her on the issues that they care about the most, that affect them the most, whether we're talking about choice and her stance on defending a woman's right to choose versus Donald Trump, who eliminated a right to choose in this country.
Well, he sent it back to the states, to be fair.
Let's be very clear. He is proud of the fact that he demolished the national right to choose in this country, period.
But there are states that are figuring this out. I mean, there are some that are, it's nearly impossible, a 6-week ban or less. But there are states in this country that allow no restrictions up until the due date of a child.
There was a national right to choose in this country, law of the land, for 50 years, which the vast majority of Americans believed was the right thing to do. But Donald Trump made a promise when he was a candidate, one of the few promises he actually kept, by the way. You know, he didn't keep his promise of 6% economic growth. He didn't keep his promise to drain the swamp.
He did have a pandemic to deal with.
But even before the pandemic,
And
America went into a manufacturing recession, which really hurt places like where I come from in the industrial Midwest. But anyway, my point is, he broke his promise for that kind of economic growth. He broke his promise to pass an infrastructure bill, right? He said he would do that. He failed to do it. The Biden-Harris administration got it done. He even broke his promise to that January 6th mob when he said, I will be at your side when you march down to the Capitol. But he actually did keep 2 promises. He kept his promise to destroy the right to choose in this country, and he kept his promise on tax cuts for the rich. And if you want to know what a second Trump term would be like, I would start by looking at those rare promises that he actually managed to keep.
He did say that he wanted to get rid of Roe v. Wade, but again, send it to the states where they are hashing this out
empower the states to
have
eliminate women's access to abortion. And also, as you know, the Republican Party continues to be interested in a national abortion ban.
Which he's disavowed completely.
Yeah, he's disavowed a lot of things. I don't believe him. Because he lies all the time.
You think that his pledge that he would not pass a national ban is one that
it's one that's going to go down with most of the promises that he's made and broken.
Let's talk about this, though, since we're still talking about the transition very quickly to a brand new nominee, apparently, and ticket. There are questions about why the vice president maybe didn't speak up earlier about what she may have seen as the president's decline. The Hill puts it this way in an opinion piece over there. It says, if all these other figures could see the country was being led by a very unsteady president mentally and physically, wouldn't Harris be able to see that, too? In what possible scenario is President Biden's vice president not directly involved in the cover-up? Or perhaps even more embarrassing, was she so detached from the day-to-day activities at the highest level of the administration that she simply hadn't noticed?
The simple fact is that Joe Biden is good at being president. You can tell by the results that he's getting, results that Donald Trump tried and failed to get, right? Trump tried and failed to get the kind of job growth that Joe Biden has presided over. Trump tried and failed to get an infrastructure bill done. So at the end of the day, you judge a president's effectiveness based on the job that they're doing. And that's what we've seen. Now, the president made an extraordinary, historic, selfless choice to take himself out of the nominating process and concentrate 100% on the presidency. I think that was the right choice. I know he's going to want to sprint through the tape in terms of the work of the presidency. Meanwhile, we have a new nominee.
And was she aware of how he was doing?
We're all aware of how he's doing. Our country has watched our president lead. And yes, we've also seen the fact that he's 10 years older than he was 10 years ago. But unlike Republicans, right, who in Trump's personality cult will take a look at Donald Trump and say he's perfectly fine, even though he seemed unable to tell the difference between Nikki Haley and Nancy Pelosi, even though he's rambling about electrocuting sharks and Hannibal Lecter, even though he is clearly older and stranger than he was when America first got to know him. They say he's strong as an ox, leaps tall buildings in a single bound.
Well,
we don't have that kind of warped reality on our side.
Well, voters...
on the contrary, the president confronted that reality in what must have been one of the most difficult decisions for an American president to make ever. And he did something that I don't think Donald Trump could even conceive of doing, which is putting his own interests aside for the country.
Well, voters have said that they are much less worried about the mental acuity and the physical strength of President Trump. They see
compared to Biden or compared to Harris? I'm pretty sure voters are worried about the age and acuity of President Trump compared to Kamala Harris, who represents being a generation younger. And how could anybody not watch the stuff he's saying, the rambling on the trail, and not be just a little bit concerned?
Well, that is certainly one of her talking points, and one of yours now as her campaign too.
And something most Americans believe.
Well, but most Americans didn't have a worry about him the way that they did about President Biden.
Americans are worried about him in lots of ways, and he's not running against President Biden anymore. You can tell he desperately wants to be, but he's not.
We do have new polls. Okay, so let's talk about this, because you said that you believe that Americans are more in line with Vice President Harris, where she is on the issues that matter. Mm-hmm. The economy, though, and inflation, that's at the top of the list for most people, and they give a substantial margin to President Trump on that in the polling. There's also the issue of the border, and that is something that, whether you want to say whatever title you want to use for the vice president, this is mainstream media in March of 2021 describing her role. Axios, Biden puts Harris in charge of border crisis. NBC News, Biden tasks Harris with stemming the migration on southern border. Washington Post, Biden taps Harris to handle border crisis. Politico, Biden makes Harris the point person on immigration issues amid border surge. That was their explanation of her having some leading role on the border. It's only gotten exponentially worse. These are not right-leaning organizations or media outlets. So what do you understand her role to be? And has the situation at the border improved or worsened? Yeah,
let's be very clear about this, because there has been a lot of mischaracterization. She was not in charge of the border. The Homeland Security Department is in charge of the border. She did do something important, though. She was assigned to conduct diplomacy with Central American countries, knowing that that's part of the bigger picture of what's affecting the border. And you know what? Those Central American countries are among the few countries to see their numbers go down in terms of the source of migrants who are seen at the border.
Not by much.
The point is, what she did was engage diplomatically and effectively. And of course, the bigger issue on the border and migration is that the Biden-Harris administration supported a bipartisan compromise to actually do something about it. One that had very conservative provisions that was hard for many in our party to support, but there was that bipartisan deal. Even Mitch McConnell was for it, the head of the CBP union was for it, and then Trump swooped in to kill it. Not because he thought it was bad policy, but because he didn't want that issue to get better, because if it got worse, it would be better for him politically.
And I'll ask Senator Johnson about that, because there were a number of provisions that Republicans, including Mitch McConnell, ended up in the final product, felt that there was something they could not vote for there, and they could not move forward.
Come on, we know why they didn't move forward. They moved forward because Donald Trump swooped in. He said, I don't want Joe Biden to get a win.
They felt, many of them, that it was a flawed piece of legislation that had too many loopholes and other things they couldn't support. This is how Washington Post,
transparent what happened.
This is how they described the border situation. Illegal border crossings soared in the months after Biden took office and immediately rolled back many Trump-era restrictions. They go on to say the number of people taken into custody by the U.S. Border Patrol has reached the highest levels in the agency's 100-year history, under Biden, averaging 2 million per year. And there's a lot of that attributed to the fact that there were dozens of things done under the Trump administration that this administration rolled back. And Vice President Harris is part of this administration and had a leading role, according to mainstream media, on handling the border.
Let's get real. Border crossings are down in the wake of President Biden's executive actions that he took after Congress failed to act.
So he could have taken action.
He wanted Congress to resolve that because that would have been more durable. But when Trump came in, talked Republicans out of their own bipartisan project because he didn't want the issue to get better. Remember, the worse things are at the border, the better things get for Donald Trump. So he has a vested interest in it remaining chaotic down there. I think this also helps to explain why he didn't exactly conclusively solve it when it was his turn. But I saw something else really important happening at the Republican National Convention on the border and the talk about immigration, which we all recognize is a problem, which is they tried to paint this narrative that if you live somewhere far from the border and immigration hasn't affected you personally, you need to think that immigration is a driver of crime. That was the real message. Immigration leads to crime.
Well, there are blue state governors and mayors who say every state is a border state now. That's Democrats.
Yeah, and now they're saying, but what the false message of the RNC was that this is leading to an increase in crime.
Well,
and I think it's really important that we talk about crime.
Have been very high profile about people. If they had not been in this country illegally,
this is my
people
point,
would still
right?
be alive.
Trying to make people think that crime is up when crime is down under Joe Biden and crime was up under Donald Trump. Now, I don't know how often that gets reported on this network. So if you're watching this at home, do yourself a favor and look up the data.
Well, we invite that.
Great. So if you look this up at home, you will know that crime went down under Biden and crime went up under Trump.
Categories.
And I think the violent crime, for sure. So I think the really important thing to ask is, why would America want to go back to the higher crime that we experienced under Donald Trump?
Okay, but they also may want to ask why they'd want to go to millions fewer people coming illegal across the border, and every single person who's here and was involved with a crime, that's a life that didn't have to be lost. And I think that's the argument being made. We always appreciate you coming, and we hope you'll come back again many times.
Thanks for having
me. And maybe as a vice presidential contender. We'll see. Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.